This is Mr. Robert Reyes, and I'm here to report about early theories of message. And so it's going to be short, but it's basically a rundown of some of the more uh, widely known theories regarding message. And so let's start. So first things first, let's start with message context and production. So, as we all know, we deliver or use message in a particular context, right? So, what makes message production possible? Let's take care first of the social aspect, right? I remember when I was studying linguistics in my master's class, right, we came upon the politeness theory. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with Brown and Levinson's politeness theory. It's all about face, right? It's all about people having face and that face getting threatened, right? And I remember clearly when we were discussing the idea of face and politeness, right? That there are three particular considerations that make message production possible. First, the social distance. Second is power, and third is rank of imposition. So I also remember that we discussed, uh, I think, an article or a study uh, about how Japanese people interact when they converse or communicate, right? So they're very particular with face, right? And in this case, socially speaking, that's the thing that makes message production possible, right? First, there's social distance. This is not really physiological distance or the distance you have from one person to another in terms of meters or feet, right? It's basically social distance in terms of one person relates or knows another person. So obviously, the more that you know a person, the lesser the social distance is, right? So the production of the message is easier in that way. The more that you don't know the person or don't know a group of person for that matter, the larger the social distance. Right? Second is power, right? So this means only three things: either you're equal in terms of how you are when two people speak or a group of people speak, or you're higher, meaning you have this particular echelon or status that makes you higher over another person when you communicate, or you're lower. Right? So, and then the third is the rank of imposition. So basically, when you relay a message through language, right, in communication, uh, say for example, a request it could either be a small request or a big request depending on the forcefulness or the necessity, right? So all of these things are basically in the context of in the social context, right? Or in a particular context which is social, right? So that's the first one. Second, of course, we have the cognitive theories of message production, right? So cognitive, this is basically the brain, the mind, and this is all about automation, right? One of the theories that is quite popular is the action assembly theory by Green, 1984. So I'll just read this verbatim. It says here, the activation of procedural records stored in memory and assembly of activated procedures into behavior. Green, 1984 and 97. The activation of procedural records is a product of many influences, right? Including the actor's goal, so what's the goal of the actor, the speaker, the accessibility of procedural records? Say, for example, you're communicating a particular event. Say, for example, or you're communicating in a particular event. Say, for example, you're the MC or master of ceremonies in a particular event. So you're basically calling uh, from a set of procedures in the past that's automated in your mind and you're able to relay the message, right? And it's the accessibility of procedural records as a function of recency and frequency. So two things: recency, that's why you're able to access it because it's very recent, or you're not immediately able to access it because it's not very recent, or you're able to access it because of frequency because you always do it, or you can easily recall it because of how frequent it is, right? So that's basically cognitive theory of message, right? So there. So now that we've taken care of the social and cognitive, let's proceed to message production processes, right? This time by Berger. Okay. Uh, Message production, of course, that makes communication possible, diba? It's so easy. Right? But if we really are to break it down into the atomic level, this is my own analogy, of course, right? If you were really to break down communication into the atom, right, we get to basically the message, right? Of course, there are other things like words into phrases, phrases into sentences, sentences, things like that, right? But at atomic level, it's the message, right? So in this case, right, just like matter, it's basically solid, liquid, or gas. Right? In the case of message, right, it's outward realization could either be speech, right, speech, written, right, or a non-verbal form of communication, right? So that's basically the outward articulation of message. Okay. Next theory, social cognition. So this time we're putting it together, right? So, social and cognition. Social cognition refers to a complex set of mental abilities underlying social stimulus, perception, processing, interpretation, and response. So there's the mind, right? It's basically the mind producing the message, right? The processes, right? All those things. And then it's put in the context of a social stimulus where there's perception, where you process, interpret, and respond. Right? I know you might be asking, okay, what's the connection of it to social mobilization and advocacy? But I think you already know, right? Because again, we are at the level of the message, right? We're extending it to the social, and then we're basically extending it to perception, processing, interpretation, and response side. Okay. Okay. Now we go on to the others, which is basically this time it's to the wielding of the message, right? So the first theory here is the message framing theory, right? Okay, so basically through message framing, either positive or negative, right? People or so-called decision makers, of course, it's not really decision like decision in a company, right? But basically, because we have everyday choices, right? We in real life, in actuality, we respond, right? We decide, basically decide, respond, decide, right? So it could either be framed, the message could be framed positively, right? Where the outcome is a positive outcome, or positively framed because it's the absence of a negative outcome. Right? Say, for example, okay, uh, if you watch your, if you watch what you're eating, right, you will become healthy. Right? That's positive framing, right? Positive outcome. On the other hand, you can also say it, frame it positively, and the result is an absence of negative outcomes. Like, say, for example, if you start watching what you eat, you will not get sick. Right? Negative outcome. Right? Same token, right? Negatively framed. Either a message on loss, losing something, or a message on non-gain. Right? Say, for example, uh, if you do not watch what you eat, you are going to get sick, right? So you're basically losing your health, right? Or a non-gain, if you do not watch what you eat, you will you will not become healthy, or you will not become healthier. Right? So basically, that's message framing. And again, I think you have an idea how this would apply to the bigger picture of social mobilization and advocacy, right? Okay. Okay, next is message learning theory by Carl Hovland, this time a psychologist. Right? So as you can see here, it's not really, well, this is the problem really with our field, right? Communication, I think we talked about this, right? So we're basically culling from all sorts of disciplines, right? So assumption of the theory, right? The first assumption, message learning, of course, message should be learned. So what does this imply? First, this implies, because there's learning, this implies that there's a changing or a changing of behavior if and only if the five-step process is followed. So first, expose, right? Expose the person to the message. Second is that you don't only expose, but you get the attention of the audience or the person or the group of people, right? Third, you don't just get the attention, but you're also able to make them understand or comprehend, right? And then fourth, like that person or that group of people, right, are basically yielding, parang pumapayag sila. So they're not just understanding it, but they're somewhat conceding, that's why yielding. And then finally, right, there's retention. It's basically they're going to apply it or they're going to remember it or use it, the message, the learning into future events or situations. Right? So the implication of this, right, the utmost implication of this, this means that there's a need for what kind of language? Of course, persuasive language, right? So again, kita nyo na yung how it would probably connect to social mobilization and advocacy. Right? Okay. Next is the sorry for this. Right? Message design logic theory. Right? So basically, there's three logics I shall discuss here. So, what this theory says is that inertly we have our own constructs or logics, right, that we tap in order to express and understand the message. Right? The first one is the expressive logic level of language. Right? Language is a medium for expression, so we're basically just putting out message so that you can express your thoughts and feelings. Right? Second is the conventional logic level. Communication is being played in cooperation, achievement towards one's ends. Right? So basically, there's a convention. So we're basically using message, being message, because we're following the convention. Right? So it's very conventional. So it's not just expression and or articulation of your thoughts and feelings, but it's basically trying to fit into that convention, right? And this leads us to the third, right? The rhetorical logic level. Sorry for the misspelling here. Rather than seeing individuals and situations boxed in by a conventional system of rules, and rather than seeing meaning in messages as fixed, the belief of rhetorical communicators is that all meaning is a matter of social negotiation and of role play in which they may rehearse themselves. Right? So basically, there's negotiation. It's not just you're not just confirming the conventions. You're not just expressing yourself. You're basically negotiating meaning. Again, medyo obvious na kung paano siya papunta sa social mobilization or uh, yung implication niya sa social mobilization. You can already see it. Right? Okay. And then subliminal message, I think there's just two more, right? Subliminal message theory or subliminal communication, Gratz, 1984, right? First, assumptions, right? So just by the word subliminal, you already get it. We communicate or use messages to change or to change behavior, right? Yun yung assumption. Assumption meaning what goes before it. So we're assuming that we communicate message so that we can change. Kaya nga subliminal, right? Right. So this kind of communication could either be overt or covert. And in this case, if it's subliminal, it's covert. Now, what are the implications of this theory? Right? Since subliminal messages covertly trying to do something, there is an invasion of we're pushing it a little bit, right? But there's a kind of invasion of privacy. Right? So parang the message is trying to get to you subliminally, trying to change you, right? But it's not saying it directly to your face, right? So there's a question now of ethics here, right? Subliminal message. Right? Again, this is again important to social mobilization and advocacy for a number of obvious reasons, right? But maybe we can talk about that in the guide questions, right? You can talk about that there. Okay. And then the final early theory of message is message reception theory. Right? So Stuart Hall says here, media texts are first encoded and then of course decoded. So may nag-encode, may nagde-decode. That's basically what we are as humans. Right? So Producers encode message that contain basically values. Eh, may value siya, uh, meron siyang laman, eh, content, and then basically the decoder decodes the message. However, what's a catch? That not all intended messages or the purpose of the message are actually captured by the decoder. Right? Thus, there are three positions. Right? So according to this message reception theory, first, there's a dominant or preferred reading. So the preferred reading, which is basically the preferred, which means it's the intention of the producer, right? Yeah. Then there's the oppositional reading, which is when a decoder reads it, the message is taken the opposite way, right? So not the intended message. Right? You can think of many situations that where this could happen. Right? Say, for example, a kind of writing that's subversive, or let's say, for example, sorry for the example, but let's say uh, an article trying to justify martial law, say for example, something like that. Right? Of course, the intention of the encoder would be somewhat different to a particular group of encoders who really saw martial law as something that really destroyed the society, say for example, something like that. Right? So there's oppositional reading. And then finally, there's negotiated meaning, where we take into consideration all the perspectives in order to come to a kind of negotiated reading of the message. Right? So again, as you can see here, there are somewhat clear uh, connections with social mobilization and advocacy, right? Which leads me to my two guide questions. So first, how do these theories now relate to advocacy and social mobilization? Please answer that, right? And among the theories, as I was explaining it, I'm sure meron kayo naisip, right? What theory have you effectively or pwede ring ineffectively and advertently or pwede ring inadvertently used in the past as a communicator? Right, so that's the end of my report. I hope you found it easy, as I've tried my best to make it really very palatable. Right, thank you everyone, and I look forward to your answers to the questions.